Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Brainfood Talk session. My name is Alessandra Corroja, and I will be talking to you today about a topic that I have quite dear to my heart, which is errors, and more specifically about creating an effective error strategy. Before we start, a little bit about me. I am currently working at Square as an advanced software engineer, and I spend most of my career creating products from scratch and mostly using UX principles to guide my solutions. And in that process, I have become quite passionate about improving the development process, but also how we create products overall. And I've noticed a problem in this process that I'm going to talk to you about today. And so we're going to take a look at that and possibly why that is happening, some responsibilities regarding that. And I'm also going to go through the process of creating an error strategy, a plan B when things don't go as planned, as well as some best practices. And as of course, at the end, we will have time for questions and answers. And before we dive into the problem, I just want to take a moment to explain exactly what I mean by error strategy because it's not a very established term. So when I say error, I mean every event that doesn't go as planned and that may impact the user experience in a negative way. And an error strategy is basically a plan of how to mitigate that and create the best user experience possible. So hope that makes sense. If not, I'm sure that through the presentation it will become more clear. But if it's still not clear by the by the end, you feel free to ask me, and I will try to explain it in a different way. Then let's really dive in and look at the current reality that I see when I'm using products as a user. And the main issues that I see is that sometimes there is no feedback when something goes wrong, or there's very early overwhelming feedback even before you started typing something. But some products also have like a middle ground in regards to that, where they do have an error message, but it's a not very useful one that the user can't really do much with it. And the most egregious, I guess, error in a sense, because the user really cannot do anything, is when there's a handled error, especially after typing for a long time in a form, when you get that beautiful white page and you don't have anything to do other than go back, try it again, and hope it works. And in the beginning of my career, I say that I saw that a lot. And I thought, okay, it's the beginning of my career. People are learning. That's why all of these errors end up in products. But it still hasn't been, it's still happening. And I still see it even years later. So I started to think about the why and started talking to people about it. And some possible causes were brought up. Some people said, okay, it's just a normal recurrence because features always come first. So that's why when things come bad, that's kind of left to the end. Or it's because people always think about the golden path and not about what happens when some things go wrong. Others said that, okay, good error handling is just difficult. So that's why these sort of errors still show up on production. And some just admitted that it's a procrastination issue because it's left later in the development process. And I agree, and I can see how these causes can lead to those errors and end up in production. But I have my own assumptions. And my main assumption is that nobody can take full responsibility on this topic. And usually when I say this, I immediately get the okay, isn't error handling only the developer's responsibility? And it's not the case because developers are not copywriters. We're not the best at the writing content that the user will end up seeing. We're not designers. Just even if we do have knowledge in that area, it's also an issue of just attention because we're so focused on functionality. Also, the designing part will also require quite a lot of time that usually we do not have. But the most important reason that I see is that we do not have always the scope of knowledge needed in order to cover everything that is needed in error handling for a product. And in that sense, who else do I see responsible? And the answer is everyone. And who is this everyone is quite dependent on the product that you have. and might look differently. But I'm going to go over a list of possible roles and stakeholders that I see in regards to the error topic. And as I previously said, I do agree that developers do have a responsibility in it, but not all of it. I see them as responsible for the functionality of how errors are displayed, caught, and processed, because that's the part that they can create the most impact in. But I also see a responsibility in the UX designers, because they have way more to say about how errors should look and how they should impact the user experience. And as I said, it's even if you have a developer who has a UX background who knows some of these things, it's also an issue of attention, just that they couldn't have both of these aspects in one person. But even if they would, it would still not be enough, because I also feel the manager or the product owner as being a stakeholder, because errors impact a lot the product image and the product overall. And they are the one role that they can have a bigger overview over the product, especially if you have a bigger product where you have multiple developer teams and UX designers. They're the ones who have the correct overview to create the most impact sometimes when it comes to error handling. And joining him is also marketing, because errors impact the user attention, and also the language being used to communicate to the user is quite important from a marketing perspective. And there's different messages on different channels, social media, in person, that they're all trying to communicate to the user, and usually a high level of consistency is used to have the best user experience possible. And joining marketing, I also see sales, because of course errors impact user sales, and errors or warnings can actually be used to upsell certain things, and also again communicate to the user. And there's also sales messaging, of course, on different channels that should also be consistent with whatever we're doing technically in the product. So as you can see on the who is responsible, these are some roles that I think that should be part of the discussion. But this is not an exhaustive list. Depends on your product. There might be other roles or other type of people with specific knowledge that might also have a stake in this. But just to give you an image that it's not just developers that they need to worry about this topic. And together with the responsibility assumption that I have, I also have the assumption that there is a bit of a missing education on this topic, and a bit of a lack of attention given to errors until they happen. And I understand why it happens, but we should be able to do something about it. And that's how I see the error strategy having an impact. And we're now going to go through the process of creating one. And we're going to start with the most important question, which is actually when. Because you should start as soon as possible in the product design process, because the longer you wait, the more work it's going to be. And errors work on multiple levels, and they're very connected with the product functionality. And for the best user experience possible, you need high consistency. So start as soon as possible, and as soon as you can. And then, of course, where is the next question. And we should start by understanding the end goal of this error strategy. What are we trying to achieve when creating it, and having this be important for our product? And I think establishing a common ground is very important, and creating awareness on the topic to all stakeholders, and also creating just a common agreement on the in the whole team that we can use and throughout the development process. And that's basically kind of the error strategy that you carry with you, and it will evolve as the development process is happening. And these goals can be achieved multiple ways, because again, every product is quite different. But I also want to give you an option on how I see it playing out in order to get to that end goal. And I would recommend getting everyone into one room. I know now with the remote setting, asynchronous communication is quite easy, but it's way better to have everyone in one room so that everyone can hear everything that's happening, and that people care about this topic. And once everyone is in the room and this meeting that I call it an error strategy meeting, um, I would remind everyone about the user and the product goals. What are we trying to achieve, so that we everyone is aware where we're trying to end up with this product. And then I would clarify for everyone exactly what the error strategy covers. And as I said before, it's all the events that do not behave as expected and that might damage the user experience. And that means that it's not only errors that you see, but it could also be warnings, missing content, just bad error messages, or missing routes, or things like that. So there's a lot of aspects that can impact the user experience. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. So the error strategy is supposed to kind of cover all the ones that you know that might pop up in the use of your product. And once we know why we're there and what's an error strategy, then I would suggest to you to use the main user journey as a frame for the rest of the meeting, or user journeys if there's multiple ones. And not only ask yourself what the user is trying to achieve, but mostly focus on what happens when things go wrong. How do we keep the user satisfied, although things are not going as smoothly as we intended them to be? And as when you discuss this user journey, there will be a lot of questions popping up, and those questions will lead to you needing to take decisions. And they're not going to be all that easy, because everyone's going to have a different point of view, and they're going to care about different things. But there are many questions that pop up, from how the user will be addressed to more technical decisions about how things are going to be displayed. But it could also be things about formulating and the information that you display to the user, and the use of the errors or warnings that you have. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but I'm sure that with all of these stakeholders in the room, you're going to have plenty of questions that are going to pop up. There's going to be plenty of things to decide. And as you decide things, you should, of course, document your decisions and your responsibilities that pop up. I would recommend you to use something similar to like RACI, so like responsibility, accountability, who needs to be consulting, who needs to be informed about each aspect that you're deciding things about. And the outcome of this meeting should be, of course, that the topic is established as important for everyone there, and there's the common ground created for the topic, but also this transparent agreement where you hold all your decisions is made between all the stakeholders, and everyone's aware about the responsibilities, and everyone can keep each other accountable. And there will always be a starting point of where to start when things go wrong. But of course, I'm realistic in this point of view, and I know that things do not always go as you plan them to go. And the issue that I see the most is about actually getting everyone into that room, because people are busy, or they don't think that it's their place, or that the topic needs to be looked at right now. So if that you cannot do that, then my plan B is to first inform your manager or your product owner that not having a meeting or talking about this as early as possible will hurt your product in the end. Um, and then find another person to either write the messages that are user facing, or at least if they don't have the time, be a spotting partner for you, so that you can have another point of view when writing text. And that person should not be a developer, and it can find someone else who also not maybe a manager or product owner, just because of the time that it will take. And usually managers or product owners are quite busy with quite a lot of other tasks. So I would, if it would be me, I would always gravitate to find someone actually in marketing, uh, in formulating the error message towards the end user. But whoever you can find that's not a developer should do just fine. And the rest you kind of have to decide at the development team level. You still think you need to have a meeting like the one I just described, only that the participants are only the people from development. And same content as before, I would recommend, but of course, feel free to change as you see fit, since your audience is a bit more technical, right? And a similar agreement should be created, just like with the other participants, but be aware of the fact that it might be a bit more reduced in scope, just because of the knowledge that people bring to the table and the point of views. And some people might see, okay, why not always plan B? The development team should know enough about the product. I don't want to invite all these other people to talk about it because they don't care or they don't have time. And I would say to this is that it's not the best thing for your product. So if you can do plan A, I would try to put the time and the effort in achieving that, especially since products target user groups that developers themselves are not a part of. And the more diverse group of voices you have, the better it's going to be, because it's quite different when you have a person who their main topic is not development, and we don't know what we don't know, right? So in that sense, when you get different types of stakeholders, they will know things that you will not be aware of, and you can take account into that when you're creating your error strategy. So even if it's plan A or plan B, I hope you have some error strategy created. And I want to share to you a bit of some best practices that I kind of gathered while creating products. And of course, like all best practices, take it with a bit of grain of salt, because every product is different, and you might stray away and do something different. It might be still perfectly well for your product. But I want to share a couple of things, and we'll start with the back end. And I would encourage you to always think about the data that belongs into a log versus the one that belongs into an error, because lots of times the errors that we throw, they're very useful for the developers, but not so much for the user. And it's gonna give you less of a headache if you put everything that you want in a log, other than messing around with the actual errors that gets returned. And then I would encourage you to have a consistent way of handling errors. I would suggest to you to have like 2, 3 formats that your UI can handle, and I would split it in of one format for validation errors, one for errors that you need to display and you kind of know they're might likely to happen, and one for unhandled errors. And you can see on the right an example of how that might look, but every language and every framework is different, and you might need a different format. But overall, not too many different ones, because then it can be problematic, and the possibility that your front end will then not recognize the format and lead to the application crashing is a bit higher. And then after you have your formats, I would think about the responsibility between layers. Your product might have different types of architecture and have multiple layers. And the examples here are for like a monolithical application. But definitely think about what error belongs in which layer and which ones need to be passed between them and which one can just be ignored. And when thinking about a monolithic application, I kind of came up with these 3 groups of a backend error that translates to a generic one in the front end, a backend error that needs to be displayed the same way in the front end, and some errors that only belong in the front end. And with some examples that came to mind, but of course there'd be multiple groups and types of error that will fit in a particular layer. It might need to be communicated or not. But the main part is to kind of identify the ones that need to be passed down, and then doing that passing down of the information consistently. And I would strongly encourage you to pass keys between layers and not strings, especially if you have like a multilingual application. And if you should use your error codes as much as possible to like group and filter errors. For example, in a previous product, we would always use 422 as a validation error. So in the general wrapper that we had for the application, we ignored those errors because we knew that the validation errors belong on a form, and we don't have to display it on the highest level. And since I've started already talking about the front end, of course, the type of error formats that we define at the back end need to be handled for your front end. and I would encourage you to display validation errors on forms as text. The other expected errors in like toast and modal or some sort of cohesive format, whichever that makes the most sense for your product. And the unexpected errors, I would handle them with some generic messages. And since forms are quite a big part of products, I want to focus a bit on them. And what I see a lot is that doesn't happen is that the validations from front end validation and back end validation don't tend to look cohesive. So you should try to make it look the same because the user does not care if this error came from the front end or the back end. They just care that something is wrong with their input. And I would always opt for inline errors. And if it's possible, scroll to the first error, especially if you have like a longer form. If you cannot show the errors as the person is typing in, definitely show them after the first submit. And after they fix their error, uh, remove the error again, either as they type or when they submit again. And if you have a longer form, I would either break it up in multiple steps or save the data that the user inputs because the unexpected reload can happen. And then the user will lose all their data and that will lead to them be quite frustrated. And if that happens, be aware that you need to clearly communicate to the user which data was saved and which data was not, especially if you have a form in which you expect documents to be passed down. Be very clear if that document was saved or not. Um, and another group of errors to look at are actually endpoint errors. I would definitely make a distinction between errors triggered by a get endpoint versus the rest, especially since in the more modern frameworks, there's like an automatic like retry, and that also leads to multiple errors being shown, the same error shown multiple times. If you can avoid that, you should. And I found that separating the get endpoints from the rest kind of helped me make sure that I don't show the same error too many times. Um, but the key to it, when something goes wrong, when you call an endpoint, you need to make sure that you do not display data that's not usable to the user, that just because the endpoint returns it, and especially not data that's sensible or only a developer should look at. That's why I gravitate to having generic errors when something goes unexpected when I call an endpoint. And the last group is actually crashing errors. And these are the ones that are the most harmful ones. And we should always try to give the user a way that they can recover from these sort of crashing errors. I'm a fan of error boundaries, especially since they can be nested, but there's different ways of achieving that. And the third party errors kind of go into this group. And as long as you don't leave the end user guessing, um, everything should be fine. But do try to write these crashing errors to your logging system, because sometimes, because of the OS you're using or the browser or your particular internet speed, you may not get the correct values in order to get that crashing error that some of the clients might of the users might get on their devices. So always log if something crashes. And just a bit about the error message content. If you have to write them, then I would recommend you this article about how to write good error messages. Um, they have multiple examples, what to do and not to do, but it basically explains the kind of clear and simple language that you should use and how you are most likely to get the end user understanding what the problem is. But again, do take this a bit with a grain of salt, just because, for example, in this image, you can see the wrong error messages. You cannot log into the application. That is based on the context. So in some contexts, that message might be completely fine. And that's why having that one other stakeholder or sparring partner to discuss the context of where your error message is being displayed is very important, and I would definitely not skip. And lastly, in the best practices category is about quality assurance. especially when we are in charge of having to do a lot regarding the errors and functionality of the product. Of course, quality assurance is the one thing that tends to suffer. So definitely test your error handling through every mean that you think it works best, and try to not just test the individual error, but the actual process as it is from the user perspective, because that will uncover issues that you might not see if you only take one part of the process. Um, so definitely spend time, even though I know we're quite tired usually after spending a lot of time implementing the features. But it will save you a lot of time in the long run if you just take the time to test it out. And actually, we're kind of near the end now, so I just quickly want to jot down some hopefully some takeaways that you take from this event about making errors a priority, and that you take the time to educate your stakeholders and kind of push up for a meeting or a place to discuss the responsibilities and content and visualization of your errors, just to make your life easier. And however you end up creating your error strategy, uh, the other part of it after creating is being consistent in applying it. Because even if you have it, if it's not applied according to it, then again, you're going to run into issues. But as long as you put the end user experience first, you should definitely be on the good side. And for all the people who are like being, I'm hopeful everything is going to work out, even though I do not spend too much time thinking about errors. Hope is not really strategy. So try to make a plan as small as possible, or as any time spent towards this topic will benefit you in the long run. Now we'll move soon to questions, but right before that, I just want to remind you about the upcoming Brainfood event that's going to happen on the 10th of November that Davi is going to present regarding architecture. And if you want to drop by and meet us in person, we also have devote meetup on the 14th, and we would love to see you. Any questions? Let's see if we get any questions. Okay. So Lance has a question. It says, I think errors not being typed visible in the function signature and languages like TypeScript makes it more difficult to tackle them and raise awareness. What do you think? Hmm. Um, I can see how that would of course make it a bit more difficult if they're not typed up. Um, but usually these sort of errors, I think they're unexpected, and sometimes they can have multiple types of errors, right? So I think just from a developer perspective, it's kind of hard to anticipate everything that could go wrong. But if you know that something will be returned and it will impact you negatively, then sure, type it up if you can. TypeScript is very good at allowing you that. Put it in, and you will create less trouble, at least in the developing team. Paul asks, would you also include guidelines for logging error situation in your error strategy? Yeah, I think that's also something that you can put. I didn't mention it just because of like logging is not as a known topic for people like from marketing and sales compared to just error messages that the user can see. But of course, for your development, of course, any sort of standards that or guidelines that you can put in the error strategy. Okay, Shahab asks, do you recommend any approach for being able to detect errors from developing perspective? Hmm. I think that the best way to approach is to realize that errors are happening is to kind of act like the user, just go into an application, trying it out, doing things as the user should do, but also try to think about, the worst way that they could actually interact with your product, and try it out and see if something happens, if something flickers, if something crashes. Try to do the opposite of what you think should be done, and hopefully that will come up and you will be able to mitigate that and put something against having that having a bad impact on your application. Um, I already answered that. Uh, okay, any other questions? Okay. So someone asked, most stakeholders have a strong focus on the happy path of things, but thinking of possible error situation usually requires a pretty strong testing mindset. How can we encourage this within teams? Mm, well, definitely just letting especially if you already have a product, so it's not like a new one, but any any sort of like mock-up or things like that, they can just try for them to try in to actually use it. I'm sure they will make them think about the wrong path or what would happen. Technically, someone should try to also leverage their experience. So if they know if in the previous product, hey, this could go wrong or that may be wrong. What if this happens? Kind of trying to play devil's advocate would kind of, I think, encourage that for teams to have a different perspective and think about not the golden path, but the sideways path, I guess. Um, but in a sense, like there's no like bulletproof answer actually on this because you people are different, so you can try and see what comes up. And as wild as questions you can think up, then you should try to ask it and see what people answer. And I think you'll be surprised about what people come back to you. Okay, I hope that answered the question. Do we have any more? No, it seems we do not have any questions anymore. Okay, then I guess this would be the end of our event. Please get in touch and reach out on LinkedIn if you want to talk. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.